Good afternoon, everybody, and really great to see you on the call today on a very wet Thursday. My name is Jodie Evans. I'm one of the co-founders of Women in Power and Defence, and really delighted to welcome our guest today, Dave Hill from Simplicity in Mind, who's going to be delivering a talk around limited beliefs. We'll ask, if possible, if you can keep your videos off. Please utilise the chat function. Please do not be shy if you want to participate into the call and obviously ask any live questions to Dave. If you want to raise your hand, I'll try and facilitate that for Dave, because I don't think Dave will be able to see that from his end. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Dave, and really excited to listen into the call.
Well, thanks very much, Jodie, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me back. I think this is my third talk, my first in this guise as Women in Power and Defence. So thank you very much for having me. So who am I? Why am I here? And why am I talking about limited beliefs or limiting beliefs? So I'm Dave Hill. I was a rifleman for 17 years. I did the sort of Sandhurst route and left after my company command tour of 4 rifles about 10 years ago. And since then, I've been working in a mixture of industries. I worked for Amazon for a year, and then I worked for what started off as Standard Life Investments and ended up as Aberdeen without any vowels by the end of it, working as a project manager for them, which doesn't really explain why I'm doing what I'm doing now and why I'm in front of you guys talking as what is basically today a transformational coach. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, sorry, while I was doing my resettlement, one of my riflemen from my first ever platoon phoned up in quite a bit of distress. He had recently been sectioned. He wasn't quite sure which way up was, and he was after some help. And he called me out of the blue. Now, I kept in touch with him since he left the army. He lived fairly near my parents, so whenever I went home to see them, we might catch up and our families would meet up and have some fun. So we'd maintained a connection, but I probably hadn't spoken to him for 4 or 5 years at that point. And the thing I noticed in that moment, and what could have been potentially a limiting belief on my part, was that I had no idea how I would help him. Absolutely none at all. But at the same time, I knew how much courage it had taken him to raise his hand and ask a question and look for support. And what I didn't want to do was discourage him by saying, sorry, no, I think I'm the wrong person. So I lent into my discomfort in that moment and went, yeah, let's see what we can do. I don't know where we're going to go, but let's do it together. Let's see what we can resolve. And interestingly, he and I have been on a fascinating journey over the last 10 years. But it opened up a window to a world which I was vaguely aware of, where veterans are struggling to get on in day-to-day life for a number of different reasons, and not all of them service related, but most of them related to their beliefs about how they may or may not fit into society these days. So fast forward 3 or 4 years, and I ended up stumbling across an idea called the 3 principles, which I'm not going to go to in any great detail today because actually it's not helpful. But what it did do for me was explain why trusting myself in that moment, even though I didn't know what the answer was going to be for Anthony, and I'll call him by his name because he and I did a podcast about 2 weeks ago talking about this very subject. Or talking very much about his journey. So he won't mind me mentioning him again here. But why trusting that we would be able to come up with a solution together made sense. And why so many other of my riflemen were getting in touch and going, boss, help, I don't know which way to go. And around the time of me learning about the principles, I realized I could do way more than I was. I wasn't quite sure what that was going to look like, but I knew I wanted to help more. And I decided to put my money where my mouth was, paid and did a course, set up what is called Simplicity in Mind today, but at that point was a part-time venture to allow me to drop down to a 4-day week with my employer, so I still had an income and allow me more capacity to help people that I wanted to care for and be there for. 3 years ago, my world hit a bit of a wobble with me having a stroke, which woke me up. I'm a fairly fit, healthy person, and yeah, through a number of unfortunate circumstances, found myself having a stroke, which took me a little bit of time to recover from. But actually, I'm doing very, very well despite that. It does catch me out at times, which is why Jodie's very kindly going to manage the chat for me. So if you do have any questions and you don't want to put your hand up and ask directly, feel free to use the chat, and Jodie will jump in and ask the question for you. I've got no problems with that. It's just something that I haven't got the bandwidth to be able to do both these days. Not even sure if I could in the past, but there we go. But that shook my world a little bit, and I realized I was probably doing way too much. I was in the middle of a divorce. I was trying to be the best dad I could to my children. I was working ridiculous hours, stuck in front of a laptop, sat at my dining room table because we were still sort of in various stages of not being back in the office at that point, and also still wanting to serve veterans, and realized that I was probably doing way too much. And at the same time, regimentally, we had a couple of suicides within 48 hours of each other, and that was it. I just decided to rip my rule book up and go, right, I'm going to jump in to do this full time. So Simplicity in Mind now is a vehicle to help veterans, but it doesn't earn me any money doing that. So what I do is I work with organizations and private individuals for a fee, in the full knowledge that that fee enables me to give 60 to 70% of my time away to veterans. I do quite a lot of support for the rifles, being a rifleman. That's a fairly obvious starting point. And we've got a thing called the Always a Rifleman program, which has been running now for about 2 years, where we've created a network of people that manage sort of man a 24-hour 0800 number. I'm one of those. So I've got a second phone which just rings when people are in trouble. And we don't do anything clever there. We just listen. And we listen from a place of understanding where they might be coming from, having a similar language, potentially having similar friends, but with the aim of trying to reconnect them with their friends and with members of the organization that they may have lost touch with. And that's having a huge amount of success. We know anecdotally that we've probably saved about 50 lives in the last 2 years of our existence, which is fascinating and amazing. And all by us just going, well, let's just lean into this and see what we can do. Underneath those of us answering that phone number, we've got about 200 volunteers that we link people up with all over the globe. And we've trained some of those as mental health first aiders, not because they need to be mental health first aiders, but because it gives them some confidence to have difficult conversations with people and potentially prepares them for some of the conversations they may end up having. And that's the sole reason behind it. But why am I here today, and why am I talking about limiting beliefs? Limiting beliefs are an interesting thing. One of the things that I've been exploring in the last 7 years of learning about the 3 principles, training with people all over the globe, to try and deepen my understanding, knowing that actually everything's already inside me anyway. But it is hugely helpful to hear other people explain how they see the world in their terms. On that journey, I've learned that every single emotion and feeling and experience that we have is trying to help us thrive. And quite a lot of them don't feel like that. And limiting beliefs are certainly fit into that category of that doesn't feel very helpful, actually. Why am I telling myself I can't do this? Now, I could have told myself that with Tony and decided to ignore that thought of how could I possibly help? He's telling me he's been sectioned. He's telling me he's been suicidal. but at a deeper level, I felt that there was something I could do as a friend. I'd been his platoon commander 20 years, well, about 23 years ago now, and we knew each other really, really quite well as young men, and we had grown apart as much as we tried to keep, in touch. It hadn't been consistent, but I felt that there was something in the connection between us that I could offer something straight away. Now, at the time, I put that down to the fact that that was part of my responsibility. Regimentally, we've got an unwritten motto of once a rifleman, always a rifleman, and that's always meant something to me. But actually, you could probably rebrand it and say once a human, always a human. And our ability to connect as humans is innate. We might think that we need to invest time and energy and effort into establishing connection with somebody else. And that itself is a limiting belief, because equally we can strike up a conversation with someone we've never met before and feel like we've known them forever, and maybe not even got to know their name during that conversation, but it's just touched us and them in a way that we would never have thought possible. And then there are other times where maybe we've got our professional head on and we're thinking we need to be portraying ourselves in a certain way, or that this person's got a certain reputation, I need to be wary of that. And that can limit our ability to establish that connection. Now, that limiting element of that is trying to protect us. It's trying to keep us safe in that moment from being hurt. Well, if that's true, then it's an amazing gift that we have to have these feelings that hold us back from things. What we tend to do, however, is judge the thought that we're limiting ourselves and we're holding ourselves back. And that's where we end up in a vicious cycle. We end up telling ourselves consistently that, oh, well, yeah, that's not in my personality. That's not the kind of thing that I do. That's not me. And unconsciously probably beat ourselves up about it. Now, there isn't necessarily truth in the stories that we tell ourselves, but they are helping us. They are, to a degree, helping us with the misunderstanding that we have in that moment about whether we can or can't support or do whatever it is that's being asked of us in that moment. And I've got really, really curious about that, to the point that it is now, what I do for a living. I now help people with the things that are holding them back, that they are beating themselves up about, that they wish weren't there. And I do that in a fairly playful way. Doesn't matter how serious the subject matter is for the individual. I'll take it hugely seriously, but I will try and instill an element of fun in there, because it's that fun, engaging way of looking at things in the world that we will have all experienced in light-hearted moments, but also in some of the most difficult times in our lives. We've been able to see the humor potentially in that situation, which gives us an opportunity to potentially change tack in our thinking, take us in a different direction, and open up a whole world of possibility. So limiting beliefs have a tendency to sort of go, oh no, this is my world. This is trying to focus me in on something that this is more my thing rather than that. And that's great, because to a degree it's helpful. It's keeping us on track with something we know we're potentially able to succeed at, and shutting away something that's either been painful in the past or we don't believe we're quite up to in that moment. Sometimes other people will see through that. Sometimes other people will see things in us that we can't see for ourselves, and they'll offer us responsibility and opportunities that we think are above us. But that's okay. in that sort of split understanding between my personal beliefs of where I am right now versus someone else's perception of what might be possible, there's some wriggle room. There's some opportunity for me to look at it subtly differently, look at it in a more expansive way, rather than going, no, sorry, that's not my bag, this is my world. Okay. And it's being playful in that arena, seeing that there is potential for us to branch out and away from the things that have held us safe to all intents and purposes, but allow us to step beyond our comfort zone into a world of the unknown in a way. Now, we've probably all experienced that as well. We know that as we grow and learn, we're going to come up against things that we haven't seen before, which potentially feel uncomfortable, some of which we'll hold ourselves back from, and others of which we'll absolutely embrace. Now, I don't know about you, but the first time I ever went on a roller coaster, I'd been listening to everybody's horror stories about roller coasters, but it still looked quite fun. I was a little apprehensive. My heart was racing a bit. But I thought, well, no, this thing's designed to be safe. It's designed to be fun. It's designed to give a thrill. So let's see what it's all about. And I think I must have been 14 or 15 at the time, and on a school trip in Germany with a friend of mine, also called Dave. Now, I wasn't, at that age, I wasn't particularly tall. I was probably 5'2", 5'3". Dave was, even at that young age, was 6'4", maybe 6'5". He topped out at 6'9". And the roller coaster we decided to go on, the first one we decided to go on, was inside in the dark. It was supposed to be an experience of space, and flying through. So there were lights around the place pretending to be stars, and there were spaceships and bits and pieces dotted around the place that we'd slow down to go past and then speed up and shoot on through deepest, darkest space inside a shed in Germany. And the pair of us were having a great time, an absolutely wonderful time, until behind us, someone decided to take a photograph of the spaceship we were beside with a flash on, at which point the whole room lit up. And we could see the superstructure of the building. We could see the superstructure of the ride. And Big Dave, all of a sudden, got the fear that he was going to be bashing his head off something. He hadn't to that point, and he certainly wouldn't have been allowed on the ride if they thought he was too tall. He spent the rest of his ride of the ride with his head between his knees, trying to be as small as he possibly could, because he feared something that wasn't true. It was doing a perfect thing for him because it was keeping him safe in that moment. Now, that's a silly little example of how we can take information on board and overemphasize the potential impact that that's going to have on our lives. Now, thankfully, that was all over and done in about 2 or 3 minutes for him, and he was off outside in the big wide world again without the requirement to worry about banging his head on something. But it's interesting how we can build patterns around information that we've gained over our lifetime, and really limit our capacity to step out of that comfort zone because, oh, well, I've done that in the past and that didn't go too well, or I was frightened of that, so I'm not going to try that again. And for those of you that have got children, you probably see that with their eating habits, around all of a sudden deciding that they don't like the taste of something anymore. And it can take years. It's almost a decade now since one of my teenagers ate fish. She used to love it until she decided she didn't, and she won't touch it at all now. I'm guessing that she would probably quite enjoy it if she was prepared to allow herself to taste it again. But for as long as she doesn't want to, that's fine. She's the one missing out. And it's interesting. You could get frustrated with that and go, oh, come on, you're being daft. Just try it. but that's not going to help. She needs to get there under her own steam. And she'll do that at some stage. She'll find herself somewhere where probably she feels like she needs to be polite because someone's offered her some food that that she feels she can't turn down, and she'll eat it and be surprised. And I find that, I find that really interesting, how we can hold something completely true about what we believe about ourselves and then change our point of view in an instant based on a completely new set of circumstances we hadn't anticipated, hadn't been able to see before that moment. So I'm hoping that this is ringing true for some, that it's adding some value. It's posing some food for thought. Please feel free, if you've got any questions at any point, to raise your hand or to ask a question in the chat. I'm more than happy. In fact, I'd encourage a conversation if anyone's up for it. But equally, I'm quite happy to keep chipping along and seeing where the conversation takes us. So just feel free to butt in at any stage. I've got no qualms on that front. So coming back to this business that I mentioned about everything being, every thought or experience or feeling that we have being there to help us thrive. I mentioned Anthony earlier, the veteran with the suicidal thoughts. And I've been lucky enough in the past to work with a psychiatrist in America called Bill Pettit. Bill is a wonderful human being. He's 82 or 3, I think now. Had retired, but has just been taken on to the faculty of a university in Edinburgh. It's not in Edinburgh, sorry, in America. Edinburgh is where I'm from, hence the confusion. I told you I get confused occasionally. In America, and he felt that to be of service to that faculty and to the students that are learning to become psychiatrists, that he should probably recertify. So he's been through the whole process of recertification after, I think, a 4 or 5 year retirement, which is no small thing. Quite a lot of learning to be done, quite a lot of exams to do, and he's knocked it out of the park. Which is not surprising because he's a bright man. But he's also a wonderful human being. And I've not met someone with so much warmth and compassion for his fellow human beings. And I was on a call with him and a group of about 60 others, I think. And he was talking about suicidal ideation. And during that, he mentioned that suicidal thoughts are our friends. And I thought, whoa, you've overstepped it there, Bill. Surely that can't be true. But he very quickly went on to qualify what he meant by that. The point he was asking us to entertain, and not to take at face value, but to test out for ourselves and see if it held any water, was if we have thoughts and feelings that are there to guide us, to help keep us safe, to allow us from an evolutionary point of view to thrive, to continue to live as long as possible, and to continue our species on this planet, then everything that we are capable of understanding and believing and dreaming up must serve us to some degree. And he went on to say that with suicidal thoughts, they're basically the mind and body's best tool that it has of getting our attention. It's probably been trying over a long period of time to get our attention, but we've been ignoring all the warning signs. And all of a sudden it's gone, right, I'm going to pull the red lever now and start putting up the end of the road sign and the stop sign, and that if you continue in this direction, it's going to be dangerous. Well, if we're driving in a car and we see signs like that, we tend to put the brakes on. we tend to pay attention to them. The same with the lights on the dashboard of our car. If they start coming on, it's not necessarily telling us that there's something wrong with the car itself, but we'd be foolish not to pay attention to them and get them checked out. And that's what Bill's assertion was about suicidal thoughts being our friends. They are an opportunity for us to take stock, to take a breath, to step back and potentially phone a friend or an organization that's there to help. And in that moment, a whole load of new possibilities come up. So I was speaking to another veteran last year who he was medically discharged with post-traumatic stress about 2 years ago, and for the majority of 2021 was bedridden with the medication he was on. It just completely wiped out his will to get up and do anything. But it kept him safe because it stopped him having or attempting to follow through on some of the thoughts that he was having. But he was completely fed up with it. He's going, this isn't a life. I'm not being the husband and the father that I want to be. I'm a burden to my family. And I used to be, he was a colour sergeant when he was medically discharged. He said, I used to be in charge of people, and now I can't even be trusted to shave myself. This is no way to live. I want to change. And so he started embracing things and looking at possibilities to get up and get out, and change the routine he was on based on starting point being the medication that he was on, and very sensibly doing that through the crisis team that were looking after him. And that developed into him being able to take up various different therapy options, which have been really, really helpful to him. But one day he phoned me out of the blue. And I knew he had been, he just started a series of EMDR. I forget what it stands for, but it's basically trying to, the idea behind it is piece together the whole picture for someone in a traumatic episode so that they've got the whole thing in its entirety. And when they're then less caught out by new bits of information, that tends to be what happens. And it's really effective. It's not for everybody, but it is really effective. And he phoned me out of the blue and goes, I'm not quite sure why I've called you, Dave. I said, okay, well, that's all right. It's lovely to hear from you. How are you doing? I said, yeah, okay, I think. I said, yeah, how's the treatment going? He goes, well, all right, but I don't think, I'm on my way there today, but I don't think the therapist is going to want to see me. I said, okay, well, why's that? Why do you think that? It's her job. It's what she's there for. He goes, well, I don't think she's going to like what I bought. Well, where have you been? What have you bought? I said, well, I've just been to B&Q and bought myself a rope. Okay, why is that? Well, I just don't think I can keep going. I think I've hit the end of the road. I think this is me. I said, well, that's a shame, because I don't think that's true for you. And I don't think that you think that that's necessarily true for you either. So, well, why have I bought this rope? So, well, we'll come to that in a second. Could you do me a favor? Can you see any bins near you? Yeah. Could you throw the rope in the bin and take a photograph for me and send me that photograph? Yeah, I could do that. So he went off and he threw the rope in the bin and sent me the photo. And I said, maybe that thought you had about taking your life led to you buying that rope, led to you making that phone call, led to you having the opportunity to see that you didn't need that rope and that you didn't want to take your life and that there were possibilities beyond that. So maybe that thought you had was the best thing that could have happened for you today. Because here we are having a conversation which so far seems to be going quite well. What do you reckon? He said, yeah, no, that seems to make sense. I said, well, why don't you carry on to your therapy session and let the therapist know exactly what you've been through today. Tell her exactly what you've done. And I bet you your session will go well. And what I'd like you to do is, when you come out the other side of it, can you give me another ring and let me know how you're doing? Because yeah, I can probably do that. So he went off to his session and came out and got straight back on the phone and said, thank you so much. I've just wasted £15 today on buying that rope. And I said, well, maybe you didn't. Maybe that was a £15 investment on the start of the rest of your life. And he burst into tears because he saw how true that was for him. Now, there's nothing clever in that. That's some poor soul struggling in the world with a limiting belief on his value in the world, following through on something that felt more true than the thought that he wanted to take his life. And he had no, I don't think he had any aspiration of us having a conversation and him throwing that away and moving on. But it gave him an opportunity to see things subtly differently. His world hadn't changed. He was still struggling a lot. He still wasn't the person that he wanted to be. So I'm just reading Lynn's message. That's so true, Lynn. Thank you. I'll just read that out. It says, it's a sad situation when suicidal people feel the absence of any hope for their future outweighs their fears of death. These poor souls need help out of the maze of despair that they're in. And I completely agree. But it doesn't require anything other than another human being showing up with care and love for them. And they don't even need to know who they are. Okay. And that's what's so cool about the work that I'm doing today, is while I have a huge amount of, I will always be as there as I can be for the veterans that I work with. I'm more interested in speaking to their friends. I'm more interested in speaking to their families and empowering them to be there for their loved ones, or for that stranger in the street, in their moment of need, because that's all it takes. The story of the Good Samaritans is a cracking one, and everybody knows it, because it's so true. We don't need to know someone to care about them, to see them as another human being and allow that to be felt by that person. There are so many people wandering around the world completely shut in, thinking that no one cares. And to a degree, most of us are wandering around in a bubble, believing that we can't necessarily help. And for as long as those two worlds exist in that imagined sense, that's going to be people's lived experience. There's another rifleman of mine who it was his girlfriend that got in touch and said, look, I'm really worried. I think he's going to hurt himself. And now this guy had already had a history of self-harm. We discussed it in the past. He did it because he wanted to feel something, because most of the time he felt completely numb. His system had shut down to the point that he didn't feel anything. So he'd cut himself to be able to feel, oh, I am still alive, I am still here. But he got himself in a pickle, and his girlfriend got in touch, and we ended up having a conversation via text message, because he wouldn't speak on the telephone and he certainly wouldn't do any video calls. I was already going to be going to see him because he lived quite locally to me. I was going to be seeing him on the Monday. I think this was a Friday. I said, look, I can come and see you tomorrow, but I'll have to bring the children with me, which is fine. I can do that. Or are you okay until Monday and we can go for a walk together? And he said, no, Monday's good. Monday's good. and we spent a bit of time walking, and we, again, limiting beliefs. He's an artist. I said, I bet you there's times when you're painting that you hate what you do and you trash it. And then after a while of painting something, hating it, trashing it, painting it again, you just drop into a space where it feels like it's flowing, like it's making sense to you. He said, yeah, no, that's normally what happens. He said, well, when you're in that moment of discomfort painting and you're trying too hard, you're over egging it in that sense. It's a sort of limiting belief going up, well, I want it to look like this, and then it doesn't, because we're so invested in what we believe the outcome to be, rather than just letting the moment flow, letting it run and see what shows up. Because what we imagine we are about to create in the world isn't necessarily what we end up with. That's certainly my understanding of the work that I do. I have a rough idea of the direction I'm going to take a conversation, whether that's a coaching engagement, whether it's a talk like this. But I have no idea really where it's going to go until it starts. And it's still until you start flowing your way through it and seeing what shows up. But anyway, there was this artist friend of mine, and he started to slow down and see that, yeah, okay, I can see how that works. He goes, but this therapist that I've got from the NHS, she's 22. She has no idea what I've been through in the army or in the police force. And she's never going to get it. She's just got out of training. What help can she be to me? I said, okay, that's interesting. And when you're sitting with her thinking that, just show me how you're sitting. He was there with his arms folded, sitting back in his chair, looking quite gruff. I said, okay, that's interesting. Well, you've put some beef on since he left the army. He damaged his back in an industrial accident and wasn't able to play rugby anymore, but drank Guinness and ate just as much as he did beforehand, and is now still about 24 stone. He's a big unit, covered in tattoos and a massive beard. So okay, so that's the picture that your psychotherapist is getting when she sees you, and she's probably picking up on that vibe of, how the hell are you going to help me? And she's probably sitting on the other side of the desk going, oof, yeah, I am just out of training and I have no idea what this guy's been through, and he seems to think I can't help him. Maybe I can't. So you've then got these two supporting arguments about why this isn't going to work, both of which I made up to tell him the story, but probably are what's happening. I said, what do you think makes you comfortable enough to speak to me? So, well, you were my platoon commander. I've known you for years. We go back a long way. We've trusted each other for a long time. So, okay, yeah, that's true. I can see that. I can see why you think that for the guys that were in our platoon together. I can see why you've still got a strong connection with them. So, your best mate here, in Falkirk, where he lived at the time, so you never served with him, but he was in the army. So I can see why, you've got some shared experience and you've got some shared stories that you can talk about, and some beliefs and core values that you both cherish from your time serving. So I can see why that works. And I know your brother is still in the army, so I can see why that works. But your parents never served, so but they're part of your family, aren't they? So maybe that's why they get a ticket into your club. Your girlfriend, you get on quite well with her, don't you? So yeah, in the main. I said, okay, that's interesting, because she's a hairdresser, has no idea about the army. You're the first person she's ever met that's ever been in it, and you've been out of it for about 12 years by the time you met. So how does she fit into your club if you can only speak to other veterans? Oh yeah, you fancy her. That'll be the thing. That'll be the thing that allows you to have conversations with her, to let her into your life. So what's the common denominator in this collection of individuals we've just discussed? And he sort of shook his head at me. He said, well, I said, they're all human beings and they all care about you. And the interesting thing about the young psychotherapist you're seeing, she's also a human being, and she wouldn't be doing the job she does if she didn't care. So maybe cut her a bit of slack next time you go and see her, and see where that takes you. Be open to the possibility that maybe she can help. And at that, he gave me a hug and pushed me out the door, because something struck him. He had a belief that limited his capacity to connect with people that didn't fit into his club, the club that he'd created in his mind. And then all of a sudden he saw something different that allowed him to open a door to something that before was completely shut, could never be opened. And it just came from a gentle conversation about what being a human being is all about. And I find that endlessly fascinating, because it doesn't matter what someone's story is. The reason that they have it, the reason that it's limiting their horizon, is always some form of protection from getting hurt. So for my artist friend, it was the fear of, well, what happens if this doesn't work? I'm making this work at the moment. Okay, I'm cutting myself. But that's part of the story I'm telling about who I am as an artist. He was telling himself that he needed to be feeling mental pain and anguish to be able to do his best work. Well, funny enough, when he challenged that as an idea, that wasn't true either. Sort of helped him to get going in the first place. Oh, I'm in the zone for doing some good work today, and off you go, because that was the story he told himself, and off you go. And 9 times out of 10, he produced something he was quite proud of, helping fulfill the prophecy of his limiting belief. So my offer to you is just to be gentle with anything that you think you're using as a story to hold yourselves back from stepping out, doing something differently. Whatever that might be, whether that's picking up the guitar and learning to play the guitar, or doing something different at work, or challenging someone in your life about the way they show up. Because the thing that's stopping us from doing that is a fear of the unknown. And actually, if you think about it, the next moment is always unknown. There is never any certainty about what's going to happen next. You all joined this call today with a perception of where it might go, but I bet you wouldn't have put together the thread of the conversation that we've had so far. And I'd just like you to be playful with the prospect that it doesn't matter that we don't know what's around the corner. If we're open and switched on to the energy that runs through every single one of us, that can energize us despite the fact that we're hugely tired, get us excited about what's next. Be more the heart beating, adrenaline side of going and doing something that is a little bit scary because it's new, but we're still going to go and do it. We're still going to go and embrace it, because it's exactly the same mechanism of adrenaline running and heart racing that comes with the thought of fear. Fear and excitement feel almost exactly the same, except for the perception of the outcome. The mechanism within us as human beings is identical for both of those things. It's just our understanding about that potential outcome of what we're about to do, what may be about to show up. And it's okay for us to be frightened. Absolutely okay for us to be frightened. It's just asking us, a little bit like the lad with his rope, to take a step back, think a little bit more broadly about other options, and see that there might be another outcome than the one that we fear. And And if the thing that we fear does materialize, we will still be able to deal and cope with that amazingly well, because we are hugely resourceful, hugely creative, and designed to thrive no matter what. So I'm conscious I've been talking for 46 minutes, and we've got about 14-15 minutes to go. So does anybody have any questions for me while I have a slurp of probably slightly cold tea?
I think all our guests have gone a little bit quiet, Dave, and I think for me, just listening to the overview, it's really insightful to kind of identify and actually how we overcome those limited beliefs.
It's just seeing that thank you, Jodie. It's just seeing that they are there for us to provide a safety net, and they are perfect for the moment, for the period that we are feeling them. There is something that we're not seeing. But what we tend to do is then shut the doors and go, right, well, this is me, rather than going, okay, what am I not seeing here at the moment? You know, I'm just trying to think of another ridiculous analogy. You know, doing a jigsaw puzzle, at times it feels like you're on fire and everything's just flowing and you can see what bit goes where. And then at other times it just grinds to a halt. Now that's not because we have stopped being able to see things. It's not because this is a difficult puzzle. It's just we've run out of the ability to see the next step, and then we crack on again. It's a silly little analogy, but it's the same thing. However you ramp up the thinking about it. Excuse me a second. Claire's just asked, can you give us some practical tips for managing limitations for the in the moment fear? Okay. It's a very good question. I think in the moment we're probably already caught up in it. But what I'd like you to potentially think about is the fact that fear is a good thing. It's doing us a favor. It gives us an opportunity to, again, like I said, slow down and take a step back and check to make sure that the thing that we're frightened of is real in that moment. You know, the fear response is something that's been baked into us through millions of years of running away from things on the savannah in Africa, and saber-toothed tigers and all of those other things, and other nasty human beings that might be after us. We also have the capacity to create scenarios that trigger that same fear response, when actually there may be nothing to fear other than the fact that we've created something in that moment. So it's really an invitation to just double check. Okay, so to give you a military analogy, there have been times in my life when I've been out on patrol, whether that's on operations or on training for that matter, where all of my senses have suddenly turned on and I'm very aware that there might be something there. Now, I'd be foolish not to check that in that moment. I go, okay, what's that about? But equally, it might be the fact that my brain has taken in information from the world through my senses, put 2 and 2 together and come up with 10. So I'll give you 2 daft examples of that, because daft examples are always more fun to play with than tricky, uncomfortable ones. So I mentioned I'm in Scotland. I used to travel on the train into Edinburgh every day to go to work. And St Andrew's Square, where I worked, is one of those bizarre freaks of nature where it doesn't matter which way the wind is blowing, it is always in your face, no matter which way you are traveling through it. Just the way the wind just whips around in there. And it was a very, very wet, cold day. And I was walking along, minding my own business, and I saw what looked like a person with a Marge Simpson coloured bright blue afro, big old afro. And whoa, that needs another look. So I did a double take, and I realised actually no, it was actually a builder with his hard hat on and a hoodie up over the top to try and keep the weather out. Now my brain had done the best it could based on the information that it had fleetingly received. I put a number of different stories in my mind together and come up with what it thought was the most logical solution. Now in that one, it was funny, but it can do exactly the same thing and create frightening scenarios for us. And it's doing that in a split second with the intention of keeping us safe. So our job as human beings, in the terms of a practical tip sense, is to take a step back in that moment and just double check the maths to make sure that what we are telling ourselves is true. Okay, so I'll give you another slightly more serious but still funny scenario. So I was in Kenya on exercise. I was an instructor teaching platoon commanders that had just finished Sandhurst how to be infantrymen. And towards the end of their training, they're given way more leniency to get on and do their own thing. So I was stood 200-300 meters away from them, observing them at night through my night sight. But I also had to be fairly close to them because I was the member of the safety staff in case there was any animal threat. So I was carrying a rifle with live ammunition. They were carrying blank ammunition. And as we were coming back from their patrol, I really dropped away from them to allow them to as much space as possible. And all of a sudden, I heard thundering hooves coming towards me. So I had a look, and it was a herd of zebra charging towards me. So, well, that doesn't make sense. What the hell's chasing them? Now, when I thought about it, actually what had happened is the guys on the hillside had spooked them, and they were running in the direction of safety in their mind, not realizing that there was another human being in the way. So they veered off out the way. But in that moment, it's like, oh my goodness, what big hairy thing with teeth is behind that and coming towards me? Perfectly natural response to think all of those things. But giving myself the space to just double check the maths of what was going on and go, okay, it's less likely that there's something chasing them and more likely that they've been disturbed by those 8 guys up on the hill over there. So it's not really a tip as such. It's more a case of doing what we do best and trying to observe the truth of what it is that we're telling ourselves. So I hope that helps, Claire. You're welcome. Does anybody else have any other thoughts or questions?
I suppose a question, Dave, is how would you know which of your beliefs are limiting? I'm sure you've touched some
yeah, that's
things
okay,
in
that's
that.
Well, they tend to feel sticky and uncomfortable, for one. And there's nothing wrong in that. You know, if you think about when you're doing something new for the first time, you might be feeling, all right, I haven't quite, you know, I've not quite got the capacity to do this because I've not done it before. But if you think you're going to produce something perfect, then you're going to put more pressure on yourself. If you're prepared to give it a try and see what happens and learn from it, then the sticky, uncomfortable feeling about this being new is just, well, yeah, that's true. This is new. So, you know, again, daft analogy, but cooking a new meal for the first time, the chances of it going as the recipe book says first time is fairly slim because you're using subtly different ingredients. Your cooker is not the same as the one that wrote the book, the person that wrote the book, and actually what they've described isn't necessarily the dish that they produced either. Now, as you get more comfortable playing with that recipe, you may start changing it, and you may start going, actually, no, that's not for me. But all right, I need this to be perfect first time is setting ourselves up for failure potentially. It might be perfect. It might be perfect. It's a possibility. But the thought that I need to get this right first time is in itself limiting our capacity to learn. Because if we think, well, no, I don't think I'm going to, we'll stop ourselves from doing it, which means we'll never actually find out whether we've got the capacity in that moment or not. Does that help, Jodie?
It certainly does. Thank you so much, Dave.
My pleasure. I've always found the first tick for me is making sure I give myself the time. Trick, thank you. Give myself the time to analyze the feeling and thoughts, like going for a hike on my own with no tech distractions. Yeah, that's really true. You know, giving ourselves space to let things settle. We tend not to do that when we think it's urgent, when we think we're about to let the side down, when we think we're going to fail. We think we need to be trying harder. But it's like feeling lost on the motorway. That's not a fun thing. That's, you know, that in itself is fairly limiting in terms of, oh crikey, I'm not where I think I am. Well, not many of us accelerate in that moment. We tend to slow down. We tend to try and pull over into the slow lane. So we've got a fighting chance of seeing the next road sign to find out where we actually are in relation to where we think we want to be. That, you know, it's always the go-to point. If it's feeling like the world is running away, is taking a step and slowing down and giving ourselves the opportunity to see more broadly. So I hope that's helpful. But thank you very much for sharing that. No worries. Thank you very much indeed.
I think we're almost there, I think, Dave, and it's crazy to think actually how quickly that hour does fly by. We are truly grateful for having you back again for third time round for us, working with myself and Natalie within Women in Power and Defence. I really hope that most of you today really took something away from this. I know I certainly did. And just a huge thank you, Dave, and the gratitude for joining us. And I'm certain we will definitely have you back at some point in the future. I think Lynn obviously has just said thanks for a great session. Marcy has had to jump off, but again, really appreciate your time today. And you'll see some of the comments coming through now. I think you've definitely, it's been thought-provoking for many others.
Well, it's a pleasure. And you know, the reason my company is called Simplicity in Mind is I'm trying to keep things simple and point to what is simple. Because when things feel simple for us, we're normally on the right page. When they feel complex, we tend to be missing something, and there's something else for us to see. You know, my youngest hates maths most of the time because it's complicated and she doesn't like it until it clicks, at which point she goes, oh, that's simple, because she now understands it at a level that it just makes sense. And that's what I'm trying to point to. You know, if you want to hear more about what I'm doing in the world, I've got a thing called the Simple Reflections podcast. I think you guys have shared a link to that on LinkedIn, but it's just gentle conversations, 20 to 40 minutes of this kind of stuff with people from all over the place. And Ant Power, who I mentioned during my talk, was on the last episode with me. So if you want to hear more about him and his journey, then that's there. But thank you so much for having me.
Oh no, honestly, the thanks definitely comes from us, and for most of you on the call, if you do go onto our website, www.womenempoweringdefence.com, you'll see under our affiliates page you can find all of the details and the contact details for Dave if you do wish to reach out directly as well. But as it's 1 o'clock, I will wrap it up. Thank you so much again, Dave. It's hugely appreciated, and we look forward to having you back very soon.
No, thank you very much indeed, and have a great day, guys. All the best.